You know how some couples sign a prenup before they get married? Well, if you're working with anyone on your podcast, whether it's a co host, a producer, an editor, a marketer, or even a guest, you need what I call a podcast prenup. Because here's the thing, even the most exciting, passion driven collaborations can run into problems. Roles get unclear, money starts flowing, people change their minds or move on. And without something in writing, well, you could end up in a tug of war over ownership, content, revenue, even the name of the show. A podcast prenup is a simple, proactive way to make sure everyone's on the same page from the very beginning. And in this episode, I'm going to walk you through exactly what it is, why it matters, and how to create one that protects you and your podcast and the relationships that make it great. So let's dive right in. Welcome to Legit Podcast Pro, the show that helps you build a rock-solid legal and business foundation for your podcast so you can make the impact, influence, and income that you deserve without the legal headaches. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and today we're diving into something I believe every single podcast needs, especially if you're not doing everything all by yourself. We're talking about podcast prenups. Yes, just like in marriage, it is a smart move to get clear on expectations when starting a creative relationship, because even the most exciting podcast collaborations can turn messy if you don't define things up front. So let's talk about what these podcast prenups are, who needs them, what goes into them, and how you can get one in place fast. So what is a podcast prenup? Well, it's a legal agreement between podcast collaborators. It spells out all the things that should be clear but often aren't. Things like who owns the podcast content, how the money gets split, what each person is responsible for, what happens if somebody leaves or stops contributing. It's not about being a pessimist or negative. It's about being smart and respectful and making sure everyone is protected and on the same page. And you need one even if you're just friends. Why? Well, here's what I see all the time. 2 or more friends launch the podcast together, starting out as a fun, passion-fueled project. But then real life happens. One person's schedule changes, another person wants to monetize, maybe they disagree over how, creative differences start to pop up, and suddenly it's awkward, it's tense, and the podcast starts to fall apart. Well, a podcast prenup helps to prevent this by clarifying who owns the intellectual property, defining the roles and responsibilities from the very beginning, setting clear terms for how revenue is going to be shared, creating a roadmap for what happens if somebody wants to step away, and it's just a relationship-saving tool. So let's break down what should be included in a good podcast prenup. First off, it should address ownership of content and intellectual property. You need to clarify, who owns what: the podcast name, the artwork and the branding, the theme music, the scripts, the show notes, the episodes, the recordings, and the RSS feed, the audience. Whether it's shared or assigned to one of the parties or the other, get it in writing. Number 2, you shouldn't declare the roles and responsibilities. Spell out who's doing what. Things like hosting and recording, research, editing, post-production, uploading and scheduling, marketing and promotion, outreach and guest coordination, the bookings, those kinds of things. When everybody knows what's expected of them, there's less friction and more follow-through. 3 is revenue sharing. If money comes into the equation, whether it's from ads or merch or Patreon or coaching or courses, you need to have a plan. Are you splitting things equally based on the workload or the ownership stake? No matter how small your podcast is right now, get this locked in. And then you need to figure out an exit strategy. People move on. It happens. So plan for it right now. What happens if someone wants out? Can they sell their share? Who keeps the name? What about access to past content? A clean exit plan will save you a ton of heartache later on. And then legal protection. What happens if disputes arise? Having a signed agreement can make all the difference. It becomes your reference point, proof of what everyone intended and agreed to at the beginning. And that alone will save you time, money, energy, and major stress. So who needs a podcast prenup? Well, the short answer is, if you're not doing your show entirely 100% by yourself, then that means you need a podcast prenup. That means if you're working with co-hosts, if you have executive producers or producers, researchers, editors, writers, marketers or brand managers, regular contributors or recurring guests, or just ordinary guests, if they are involved in creating or growing your show in any way, you need something in writing with them, period. So, what are the different types of podcast prenups? Now, depending on the structure of your podcast, there are several different kinds of agreements that you should consider. There's the co host agreement. This covers the shared IP, the revenue, the roles, and the exit plans between co hosts who may or may not be equal partners. Or there could be a work for hire agreement. This applies when you hire somebody to work on your show, maybe as a host or a narrator, maybe as an editor or a designer or anybody with a creative contribution. And there are also those folks who appear regularly but aren't part of the core team. We'll call those contributors. They need to sign releases that give consent for the recording and editing and so on, just like with the guest releases. This is for your average guest who comes on once in a while, or just once. So you've got their consent to record them and edit and publish their appearance. And then everybody knows that you own the show that you make together. They don't get editorial approval or compensation, and they can't later come and change their mind and demand a takedown. And all of these need to be tailored to your specific situation. Now, let's be clear. I don't want to sound like this is a tremendous ton of work. With your co-host, it's one time. With your collaborators, your editors, those kind of folks, it's one time. And the guests, each guest signs a release. It's not that big of a deal. So here's what I don't want to see happen. These are common mistakes. Don't rely on text messages or verbal understandings, in air quotes. Don't assume that things will never go wrong. And don't wait till there's a problem to try to get things in writing. By the time tensions rise up, it's often too late to negotiate a deal in any kind of good faith. So start with clarity. That is, start with a podcast prenup. So where do you get one of these? Well, good news is you don't have to start from scratch. Inside my Easy Legal for Podcast program, I walk you through exactly how to do this step by step. I've actually put together a secret video that shows you a sample lesson from inside the course, so you can get a sneak peek and see how easy it can be. You can head on over to gordonfiremark.com/level up. That's one word, level up, to watch it now. gordonfiremark.com/level up. And if you're ready to grab the lawyer-drafted forms and templates we have for podcast prenups, like co-host agreements, co-production deals, contributor and guest releases, and more, head on over to podcastlawforms.com, my store where we sell these on an a la carte basis at really affordable prices. And everything there is ready for you to just plug and play. Insert the names, change the numbers a little bit if you need to, and you're good to go. But if you'd prefer to have something a little more custom drafted, either with me or on your own, grab my free Podcast Prenup Planning Guide. That's at podcastprenup.com. So here's the deal. Podcasting is creative work, collaborative work, and potentially profitable work. But without the right agreements in place, it could also become messy, stressful, and legally risky. So protect your podcast, protect your team, protect yourself. Get a podcast prenup in place before you hit record the next time out. Thanks for tuning in to Legit Podcast Pro. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and I'll catch you in the next episode when we'll be talking about what to expect when navigating the world of brand deals for your podcast. It's going to be here somewhere on the screen if you're watching. So I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for being with me on Legit Podcast Pro.